it's time to resume, and so we can get to our feature teller. He has two wonderful stories. He's going to talk about a cherry red Corvette and his first vacation. Now, this is Catherine's husband, and I'll tell you a little more about him just before we bring him up on stage.
I have arrived at
Wallace, forgive me, but from the south here, this is the Appalachians, and I'm Michael Small, and you're part Catherine's husband, like it or not. Wallace grew up in Aiken, South Carolina, and his daddy would have told you that he started telling tales as soon as he started talking. And he got his bottom worn for it a couple of times. But he's finally back in the East Tennessee hills with us, and he's a wonderful storyteller. He's every bit as good as his father. He's a feature teller. Please welcome Wallace Schilling.
I think you need to go back to introducing me as an award-winning liar. It would be the standard is not as high. My wife Catherine has come up several times in the story of her love for spiders and snakes. And other things. I need to tell you this about it. We were looking forward at Covet to getting to go on vacation, and we decided we were going to New Orleans. I was thinking jazz and Mardi Gras and food and those kind of things. And I was just, my mouth was watering really. We landed at the New Orleans airport, got in our rental car, and she insisted that we get in the car immediately and drive toward Baton Rouge. We didn't stop in Peru. We went on almost to Lafayette. She made me stop as she inquired about a new boyfriend. She said, I want a Cajun tour guide. I want to go into the Capilaya swamp. Now, it was the middle of winter. I mean, it was cold in that swamp that day. There wasn't an alligator moving. My wife struck up such a good friendship with the little Cajun guy that was running the tour that she's gotten herself invited back in warmer weather so she can see spiders and snakes and gators. And she said, see her, that was the highlight of the trip. It was all downhill from there. We went to Preservation Hall, heard the jazz band. She came home, she says, we went to the swamp. I need to say this about, I need to defend myself only here slightly. I have a reputation for stretching the truth way out of proportion. Betty Ann has now got a fact-checking company that checks the things that I say on the checking. She used to ask me all the time about whether it's true or not. So I encourage you to fact check the things I tell you to know. The first story I would like to tell you about, I enjoyed one night exchanging notes with John McCutcheon because he tells this story about the cherry red Corvette. Plays a song about it. And he said it's based on an urban legend. And I opened my folder and I took out the articles and things you're going to hear about in the story. And I'm going, it's not a legend. There's fact. I need to swear you all in right now. Because I spent some time as a counselor and a therapist, and there's a rule that you have to keep these things confidential, completely confidential. Well, but there's a way around this. If you're in a supervisory session, you can share the details, but not the names. So I'm swearing you all in. You need to measure the truth of the story I'm fixing to tell you. And I will leave it at that. One evening, I had had someone call, a father call up for a late afternoon counseling session, like right before closing time. He brought his son in, and his son was just like most teenagers, not wanting to talk to anybody, what's going on. And I finally said to the kid, I said, you know, I'm going to have to assume that everything that everybody is saying about you is true if you're not going to say anything to me. And they've been saying pretty bad things. And I wrote down at the bottom of the thing on my notes, and I didn't say it to the dad when I told him, this kid's just right to be a runaway. Well, this is what happened. He ran away with his runaway buddies, his people. And they went out and they caused all sorts of damage and mischief. Even some of their family home. It was an awful night. And I was surprised because this story goes back way. You see, when this father was a young man, when they were just married, he and his lovely bride bought a home. And they moved in and they were happy and they were going to have their first child. The guy decided he needed a hobby. You've heard about man caves? Well, this was the man garage. He came home one day with the bodies of what was supposed to be a gorgeous cherry red Corvette. It was the frame of what might have been, maybe doubtfully so, a Corvette. So if all you had left was just the frame, rusted out, no tires, nothing else. And he pulled it into the garage where the family car used to be. And from that night on, he went out every night. And he worked to the point that his lovely bride felt like she was being ignored. She was being left with the child care responsibility. He said, no problem, dear. I will look after our boy. He took the boy and put him in his car seat and put it right on the tool rack. And he worked on that Corvette every single night. He'd order a panel to put back in the door. And over about 10, 15 years, it started to look more a rusted out Corvette. But nonetheless, a Corvette. And he said to his son, as soon as his son was old enough to talk, this will be your Corvette. It's yours. It wasn't but a couple of weeks before this story happened that they finally gotten enough rust off of it that the car could be painted. Actually, there was an engine in it. You know, it would run. They drove it over the paint shop, and when it came back for the first time in 15 years, it was indeed a gorgeous, beautiful, cherry red Corvette. And you know what teenagers think about when they're that age? When can I get my driver's license? So the boy was thinking about how many weeks until he was going to be old enough to go get his driver's license because he had that Corvette waiting. Now the man's wife was thinking, I have put up with him in this car long enough. He loves the car more than he loves me. To be honest, he said, that might indeed be the facts. But he had promised this car to his son. The son didn't handle the divorce very well. It was kind of not having money. You know how it is when kids are that age and the family kind of falls apart. What do you think about? And he started hanging out with the runaways that hid behind his school. He went out and they broke into each other's houses and they did damage. And the runaway kid that really knew what he was doing knew how to avoid getting arrested. But this young man wouldn't have a lot of experience, and the next thing we know, he was in jail. And everybody was holding him accountable for the damage to their property. You couldn't find them anyway. You couldn't hold him responsible at all. So the dad called me back the next day and he said, "What am I going to do?" And I said, "Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to bring the temperature down. You have to make restitution to these people for their damages." Now, the only person that wasn't interested in restitution, wasn't willing to accept apology, was the mother of the other runaway kid that had disappeared into the woodwork. She was going to hold his wife's son completely and totally. It was a sad. And his dad said, "How am I going to pay for all this restitution?" And I looked at him and said, "You're going to sell the cherry red Corvette." Bad decisions have consequences. And he took it out and it sold right away. And he and his son got it back together. And he indeed didn't end up in jail because he'd done the right things. He made the restitution. He made the apology. And he and his dad decided, we are going to start tomorrow morning and we are going to read the ads in the state paper for cherry Corvettes. And so they started collecting a new car. Nobody knew when they get all those parts back together. They had to go through the rust and the bent chassis and all of those kind of things. And it was going slower. At 17, 18 years old, it wasn't like taking a kid in the baby seat and putting them on a toolbox and doing that. But it was going slow. One morning, now that it was just the two of them, because Mom had gone her own way, they were sitting at the table and they opened the paper. Do we do this anymore? Does anybody ever read the classified ads in a real printed newspaper anymore? There in the newspaper was an ad. Red Corvette. $65. Now that turned out was the exact amount of money that was left after paying restitution from the original sale. And the boy had folded that money up and put it in his wallet all of those years ago as a reminder of what not to do and what the price was to pay. It can't be a Corvette for $65. That's just not possible. They must have left the word out. It must have been Corvette parts, $65 worth of Corvette parts. What they called the number. And the woman who answered the telephone said, "Yes, it's a Corvette. Come right on out." They didn't, the feet didn't touch the floor. They were in the dad's truck and they were driving out toward the address they were given, not knowing what they were going to do. They agreed on the way out. We're not going to say anything about what's going on. We're not going to offer any facts. But when he pulled up in the driveway, the dad said, the place looked amazingly familiar. He had been there before. When the woman pulled out the Corvette for the little kid, the dad's heart sank. He said, "That looks exactly like a Corvette." that we had spent all of those years filming. 65,000 maybe. It was in perfect condition. It was a classic. So the woman assured them it was $65. The son pulled out his wallet. Dad, I've got this one. He unfolded the $65. He carried all here's and he passed them across to the woman, and they got in the Corvette to drive it off. We brought Dad back to the car, the truck, so they could drive home. When they pulled back up the truck, having paid for it already and had the bill of sale and Father said, I have got to know what's going on here. This is what the woman told me. She said, this weekend, my husband called from his business trip in Las Vegas. He called to say that he wasn't coming home, that he had met one of these young ladies that's in the show that doesn't wear a whole lot of clothes, and they had fallen in love. It's the first time he had been in love in years. And he called his wife to say he wanted a divorce. She could have everything except he wanted her to sell the Corvette and send him the proceeds of the sale. So he put the ad in the paper that says, for sale, cherry red Corvette, $65. She collected the $65 and sent him what she thought he was worth. Now, unlike John, who says this is an urban legend, I have the clipping of the article from the state classifieds from that year. Probably couldn't do this anymore. I have the story in the paper, and I have all the facts that can be checked. To close out this evening, they call it a family story. I'm not sure that any of my family would be willing to be associated with this story. This is a story that my brother used to tell in his own way, and he isn't with us anymore. So in his honor, I continue to tell this story. When I was 2 years old, my father came home one day and said to me, after my mom had been away for a day or two, how would you like to have a brother? Now, I have wondered ever since that time, if in that very instant, if I'd have said no, how the rest of this story would have played out. Because the next door neighbor came immediately over after I said yes and gathered all of my possessions. I had grown used to in 2 years of being an only child. It really has benefits to being an only child. And she took and put up on the very top shelf of the closet in my room where my crib was every last toy. She took the sheets off the bed in the crib and put new sheets on it, and she moved me into what I was to discover was the guest room. During the rest of my life, I was always a guest. Because this young bundle of joy came home that very night. And he got to sleep in my crib. I'm not sure I wanted him there. I wasn't getting the attention that I was entitled to. My mother was tired after her trip. And she went into the bedroom to sleep. And they told me to go to bed and not to bother. I hadn't been in bed 15 minutes when I was bored and wanted something to do. Now, I was old enough finally that I had learned to climb. So I took my crib to the person they call my brother, the baby in the house in it, and I rolled it from where it was in my room over to my closet, and I climbed up in the top of the closet on that very top shelf that that lady thought I couldn't get to, and I started sorting through the closet. The things that I didn't like, I threw in the crib. I said, "Brother, you can have that one. You can have that. These are the good things. I'm going to take them back with me." I filled the crib entirely to the top and put my stuff in the other room. And I slid the crib back where it belonged. My brother was a good sleeper. He didn't wake up in the midst of all of that. And I went back into the room where they put me to bed, played with my toys, and I heard some motion in the house. I pretended I was asleep. There was yelling and screaming, and Mama said, "What have you done to our beautiful baby?" They went in the other room, and "How did these toys get in this room?" You know what I said? I don't know. How it was. This story was the beginning of characterizing a lot of events in our life together as brothers. As life went on, I threw tennis rackets through the door. I did everything at Brother's Head. There was a competitive nature. But I do remember our very first vacation together as a family. I didn't really know what a vacation was because, two, I hadn't been on one. And when Gary came home, I didn't get to go on anything. But one day my dad came home from work. And he went over to the neighbor and he borrowed the neighbor's fishing boat and trailer and hooked it up behind him. And he said to the two of us, "Mom's getting us packed. We are going on vacation to Lake Murray. We're going to fish, have a good time, and have campfires and all of that kind of thing." My mother packed a car with everything we owned. It went down between the seats, it went in the 440, it went in the trunk. Now, some of you may not know this, but in those days, in the dark ages of the 1961, 62, they had not invented, well, they had car seats. A car seat was a seat in a car. They were a permanent part of the seat. When you needed to put a baby in a car, you wrapped him up in a blanket and put him on the back seat. So my brother traveled to the lake in fine accommodations. And we had a wonderful week. Dad would throw that boat out on the lake and he was teaching us to fish and all of those kind of things. We had a pretty good time. The week was over and we were sad to go home. Then Mama loaded the first and most important thing into the car. She wrapped Brother, who was too little at that time, in his baby blanket and put him on the back seat. Said to me, "Wallace, you're 4 years old, and it's time you be responsible. You've got to help with loading this car to go home. Help your father get the boat out of them." Now at 4, you can't do very much, but Dad backed the car down to the lake with the trailer on the back of it and pulled the neighbor's boat out and got it up on the trailer and pulled forward so we could load the car with all those possessions that had to go back home there. And I started putting my things in work. I was going to see them. And then she started giving me his things. Why can't he fulfill his responsibilities? They're his toys. Why am I? Then I was expecting to put things at the foot of for my mother was to see all around there were the things for us to have the meal on the way back. So I slid across the seat and the steering wheel. I remember looking at the steering wheel and I put things there. And I looked up and looked back at my brother and I said, he is not carrying his load. I am tired of being the responsible one in this family. How am I going to get their attention and let them know? Well, I'll tell you something else that hadn't been invented in those days was transmission interlocks. Because I slid back across the seat and I sat behind the car and I imagined driving that car home. And I reached up and I put the car, I didn't know what reverse was. I pulled it down to the first position and it went pop. Suddenly the car was moving, the door was open, and I said, that wasn't quite what I had planned. So I jumped out and went back in the house and said, Mama, I need the next load. About that time, there was a terrible racket outside. You know, the boat had slid back, the car had slid back, they were headed toward the lake. They were asleep on the back seat. I told you he was a sound sleeper. But at the very last second, the boat jackknifted, trailer and all. And that trailer and the boat went into a tree. You'd be amazed at how many pieces of boat collect up when the boat has run smack dab into the tree. But it stopped the car from going in the lake. And my mama, just like the very first day my brother came home, and I rushed down to take care of my brother. I'll be honest with you, I don't remember getting in trouble that day. I do remember that they collected up all of the pieces of the boat, and when we got home, my dad spent a long time straightening out the trailer and taking fiberglass to put that boat back together as best as he could so he can return it to the neighbor. I was used to being in trouble. But I think they were so glad he was all right that they forgot to punish him. What I didn't realize is that 13, 14 years later, my brother and I were going to be in one class together ever in our lives. When he was a freshman, sophomore in high school, and I was a senior, we took the same public speaking class together. And he told this story as his official speech at the end of the public speaking class. And he said that the title of the story was Life with Cain and Abel. Or how it was that he came to be that his lifetime goal was to invent an emergency brake that could be applied by a 2-year-old. Well, I had to sit there and listen to this story and suffer the humiliation of all of my friends, knowing that I had more than once attempted to do away with my brother. And that's the truth, and I'm sticking with it because it's the way my brother told the story.